The world knew Tina Turner, but it wasn't a name she chose. That name slipped into a young girl's life one quiet evening. Anna Mae Bullock thought it was just a stage name at the time, part of a career, a few songs, something temporary. But there was something she didn't know. This name would become her identity over the years. It would put her on stage, make her a star. But at the same time, it would bind her to a man's control, and one day when she was ready to lose everything, Anna Mae Bullock would fight for just one thing: to reclaim the name Tina Turner. This isn't a music story. This is the story of a woman taking back her own name. November 14, 1960, the Ike Turner Revue was between sets at the Manhattan Club in East St. Louis. Smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the scent of whiskey and sweat from the packed dance floor. The bass line from the jukebox vibrated through the floorboards while couples swayed under the dim red lights. 20-year-old Anna Mae Bullock stood in the wings, watching the crowd that had come alive during the first set, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline of performing. She'd been singing backup with Ike's band for over a year now, learning the rhythm of live performance, the way a crowd could lift you up or tear you down depending on the night. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something was going to change, though she couldn't have predicted what. The backstage area was cramped and humid, filled with instruments cases, amplifiers, and the kind of controlled chaos that existed behind every successful show. Anna Mae could hear the crowd's conversations filtering through the thin walls, their excitement still buzzing from the first set. They'd been particularly responsive tonight, especially when she stepped forward for her featured verses. "Anna Mae," Ike's voice cut through the backstage chatter. He was standing by the dressing room door, his face serious in a way that meant business. His processed hair was still perfectly styled despite the heat, his stage clothes immaculate. This was Ike Turner in businessman mode, not performer mode. "Come here, we need to talk." Anna Mae wiped the sweat from her forehead with a backstage towel and walked over, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. She'd learned to read Ike's moods over the past year, the difference between his creative frustration and his business calculation, between his artistic passion and his commercial ambition. This wasn't anger or artistic frustration. This was Ike thinking about money and success, and how to get more of both. "You hear how the crowd responds when you sing?" he asked, lighting a cigarette with his gold lighter. The flame illuminated his face briefly in the dim backstage light. "Not just tonight, every night for months now. They don't care about the other girls. They don't even notice them when you step forward. They care about you." Anna Mae nodded but didn't speak. She'd noticed it too. The way conversations stopped when she took the microphone, the way people moved closer to the stage when she sang lead. But in her experience, when Ike was thinking out loud, it was better to listen first and speak only when asked. "I've been thinking," Ike continued, blowing smoke toward the water-stained ceiling. "You got a voice that can take us places, real places. Not just these clubs, but radio, records, maybe even television. But Anna Mae Bullock?" He shook his head slowly, as if the name itself was holding them back. "That name ain't gonna sell records. That name ain't gonna get us on the radio in New York or Los Angeles." The conversation was heading somewhere Anna Mae hadn't expected. She'd thought they might talk about more solos, maybe a featured song or two, perhaps even a small raise in pay. But Ike was talking about something much bigger, something that felt both exciting and terrifying. "You see, the problem is," Ike continued, walking closer to the cracked mirror on the wall. "People hear Anna Mae Bullock, and they think small-town girl, church singer, backup vocalist. Nothing wrong with that, but it ain't gonna make us rich. It ain't gonna make us famous." Anna Mae felt something shift in her stomach. She'd never thought of her name as a limitation before. It was the name her grandmother had given her, the name she'd carried from Nutbush to St. Louis, the name that connected her to her family and her roots. "So here's what we're gonna do," Ike said, turning back to face her directly, his eyes intense in the way they got when he'd made a decision that couldn't be changed. "From tonight on, you ain't Anna Mae Bullock anymore. You're Tina Turner." The words hit the air like a physical presence. Tina Turner. Anna Mae felt the syllables form in her mind, rolling around like dice in a cup. It was sharp, punchy, modern. It sounded like someone who could command a stage, someone who could make crowds scream, someone who belonged on the radio. "Tina Turner," she repeated slowly, testing how the words felt coming out of her own mouth. "That's right, Tina Turner. It's got energy, like electricity. It's got power, like a storm, and it's gonna be the name on the records when we make it big. And we are gonna make it big." Anna Mae looked at herself in the cracked mirror behind Ike, seeing the same face she'd always seen, but suddenly imagining how it might look under different lights, in different clothes, with a different name attached to it. The same voice, the same dreams, but suddenly she was supposed to be someone else entirely. Someone named Tina Turner. That's right, Tina Turner. It's got energy, it's got power, and it's gonna be the name on the records when we make it big. Anna Mae looked at herself in the cracked mirror behind Ike. The same face, the same voice, but suddenly she was supposed to be someone else, someone named Tina Turner. "What about my real name?" she asked quietly. Ike laughed, but not unkindly. "Anna Mae's gonna be just fine. She's gonna be there when you go home to your family, when you're not performing. But when you step on that stage, you're Tina Turner. That's who the world's gonna know." And just like that it was decided. No negotiation, no discussion about what Anna Mae wanted. Ike Turner had created Tina Turner with a few sentences in a smoky backstage room. "Come on," Ike said, stubbing out his cigarette. "Time for the second set. Time for Tina Turner to introduce herself to the world." Anna Mae followed him toward the stage, but as she walked, something shifted inside her. She was still Anna Mae Bullock from Nutbush, Tennessee. But she was also about to become someone else entirely. The introduction that night was simple. "Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Tina Turner." And when Anna Mae walked into the spotlight, she felt something she'd never experienced before. The name fit like it had been waiting for her all along. But what Anna Mae didn't understand that November night was how completely that name would take over her life, how it would become both her greatest asset and most valuable possession, how it would elevate her to heights she'd never imagined, and eventually trap her in a relationship that nearly destroyed her. Most importantly, Anna Mae had no idea that 18 years later she would fight for the legal right to use the name Tina Turner, that in a courtroom in 1978 she would give up everything else, money, royalties, publishing rights, houses, cars, just to keep those two words, Tina Turner. Because by then she would understand something Ike never did. The name wasn't his creation anymore. It had become her identity, her essence, her soul. The years between 1960 and 1978 were filled with triumph and torment. The Ike and Tina Turner Revue became one of the most electrifying live acts in music history. River Deep, Mountain High, Proud Mary, Nutbush City Limits, each hit made the name Tina Turner more famous. But fame came with a price Anna Mae hadn't anticipated. As Tina Turner grew bigger, Ike's control grew tighter. He managed every aspect of her career, controlled every dollar, dictated every song. Behind the scenes, the relationship became increasingly violent. Anna Mae began to understand that Tina Turner was both her freedom and her prison. On stage she could be powerful, commanding, unstoppable. Off stage, that name belonged to Ike Turner. It was his creation, his property. For years Anna Mae tried to convince herself that the success was worth the cost. The name Tina Turner opened doors that Anna Mae Bullock never could have walked through. It put her on television, got her into recording studios, made her a star. But as the abuse escalated, and Ike's control became more suffocating, Anna Mae realized something that would change everything. She needed to escape not just from Ike Turner the man, but from Ike Turner the business partner. And that meant potentially losing the name that had made her famous. The breaking point came on July 1, 1976, in a hotel room in Dallas, Texas. The Ike and Tina Turner Revue was in the middle of a grueling tour, the kind that had made them famous but was slowly killing Anna Mae's spirit. After a particularly brutal fight that left her face swollen and her spirit broken, a fight that started over something as trivial as the wrong song order, and escalated into violence that left her questioning whether she would survive the night. Anna Mae locked herself in the bathroom. The fluorescent light above the mirror buzzed and flickered, casting harsh shadows across her reflection. The woman staring back was barely recognizable as either the confident Tina Turner from the stage or the hopeful Anna Mae Bullock who had left Nutbush 16 years earlier. Her left eye was swelling shut, her lip was split, and there were finger-shaped bruises forming on her neck where Ike had grabbed her. But it wasn't the physical damage that broke something inside her that night. It was the realization that she had become a prisoner of her own success. The name Tina Turner, which had once felt like freedom, had become the bars of her cage. As long as she was Tina Turner, she belonged to Ike Turner. As long as she was famous, she was trapped. Sitting on the cold bathroom floor, Anna Mae made a mental inventory of her life. She was 36 years old. She had no money of her own. Ike controlled every dollar they earned. She had no legal rights to the songs she'd helped make famous. She had no home that wasn't connected to Ike's business empire. She had no identity outside of being half of Ike and Tina Turner. Most terrifying of all, she realized she wasn't sure who Anna Mae Bullock was anymore. It had been so long since she'd been allowed to be herself, to make her own decisions, to speak without fear of violent consequences, that she'd almost forgotten what her own voice sounded like when it wasn't performing. That's when she made a decision that seemed impossible at the time. She would leave everything behind, the career that had made her famous, the success that had brought her wealth, the name that had become her identity. She would start over with nothing, rather than endure another day of living in fear. But as Anna Mae began to mentally pack her single bag and prepare to walk away from the life she'd built, she realized something that surprised her. She couldn't just abandon the name Tina Turner, not because of the fame or the money it represented, but because over 16 years that name had become who she really was. Anna Mae Bullock was the frightened girl from Nutbush who had accepted abuse because she didn't believe she deserved better. Anna Mae Bullock was the woman who made excuses for Ike's violence, who stayed silent when she should have screamed, who disappeared into the background when she should have demanded to be seen. But Tina Turner? Tina Turner was strong, fierce, uncompromising. Tina Turner was the woman who could electrify a crowd of thousands, who could make her voice heard over a full orchestra, who could command respect with a single gesture. Tina Turner was the woman who could walk away from everything and start fresh. The problem was that legally, professionally, and financially, Tina Turner belonged to Ike Turner. The name was part of their business partnership, their joint assets, their shared professional identity. Taking the name meant taking something that wasn't technically hers to take. But as Anna Mae sat in that hotel bathroom, bleeding and scared and finally ready to save her own life, she realized that some things can't be owned by contracts or business partnerships. Some things belong to the person who lived them, breathed them, became them. So when Anna Mae walked out of that hotel room at 3 a.m. on July 2, 1976, she didn't just take her clothes and her dignity, she took the name Tina Turner too, even though she had no legal right to use it. Because even though Ike had created that name, Anna Mae had become it, and no man, no matter how violent, no matter how controlling, had the right to take away who she had become. The 2 years that followed were the most difficult of her life. Without Ike's connections and business infrastructure, work was scarce. Booking agents didn't return her calls. Record companies weren't interested. Many people in the music industry assumed that Tina Turner without Ike Turner wasn't really Tina Turner at all. But Anna Mae refused to go back to being just Anna Mae Bullock. She had evolved beyond that frightened young woman. She performed in small clubs, took backup singing jobs, did whatever she had to do to survive, all while using the name she had no legal right to use. Ike's lawyers sent cease and desist letters. They claimed that Tina Turner was his intellectual property, his creation, his trademark. They demanded that Anna Mae stop using the name immediately. But for the first time in 18 years, Anna Mae said no. The divorce proceedings in 1978 became a battle for identity itself. Ike's legal team argued that Tina Turner was intellectual property created by Ike Turner's artistic vision. They claimed Anna Mae had no more right to the name than an actress to a character created by a screenwriter. Anna Mae's lawyer, Mike Stewart, saw things differently. "Your Honor," he argued, "Tina Turner isn't just a stage name, it's become Miss Bullock's professional identity, her artistic persona, her very sense of self. Taking that away would be like taking away her voice." The negotiations were brutal. Ike was willing to let Anna Mae have the name, but only if she gave up everything else. No alimony, no share of joint assets, no rights to songs she'd helped make famous. Most lawyers would have advised taking the money, but Anna Mae understood something others didn't. Without the name Tina Turner, she wasn't just giving up a career, she was giving up herself. "I don't want the money," she told her lawyer. "I don't want the houses or cars, I just want my name. I want the right to be who I've become." The final divorce decree, signed on March 29, 1978, was unusual in its stark simplicity. Anna Mae Lawson, she had briefly married another man during her separation from Ike, received no financial settlement, no alimony, no joint assets, but buried in the legal language was a clause that gave her something more valuable than money: the exclusive right to use the name Tina Turner professionally. When Anna Mae walked out of that courthouse, she had nothing but her voice, her talent, and her name. But for the first time since 1960, that name truly belonged to her. The vindication came 5 years later. In 1983, Tina Turner, now owned completely by the woman who fought to keep it, released What's Love Got to Do With It. The song became her biggest hit ever, proving that Tina Turner was more than Ike's creation. But the real victory wasn't commercial success, it was personal transformation. Anna Mae Bullock had spent 18 years being told that Tina Turner belonged to someone else,
But in that 1978 courtroom, she proved that some things, identity, artistry, essence, can't be owned by anyone except yourself. Years later, when interviewers asked about giving up financial security for her name, her answer was simple: I wasn't giving up money for a name, I was keeping my soul. In 1960, a man gave Anna Mae Bullock a new name. In 1978, a woman took that name back. The difference between those moments, between being given an identity and claiming one, is the difference between performing someone else's version of yourself and becoming who you're meant to be. The name Tina Turner didn't just belong to Anna Mae Bullock. By 1978, Anna Mae Bullock had become Tina Turner, and Tina Turner belonged to no one but herself. If this story moved you, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear about fighting for who you are. Hit the bell